Hello and welcome to the Cranky Pundit podcast. I'm your host, Mike Morgan, the Cranky Pundit. And guys, I have a podcast today that I'm excited to bring to you. It's called 50 Premier League players that are better than Paul Scholes, that have played in the Premier League. I'm not even going on about like Xavi, Iniesta, players that like were better than Paul Scholes and played in other leagues. No, I'm going on only Premier League players. Only players that have played in the Premier League that are better than Paul Scholes. I am absolutely sick of the debate. Oh, Paul Scholes was better than Gerrard. I've been going on about it in this podcast for an awfully long time. When I hear somebody in a pub say that, oh, Scholes was way better than Gerrard, I just go, all right, yeah, and just turn away and realise that that dude is an idiot. Like, anybody that's actually a United fan and that can call the game as it is just goes, yeah, Gerrard was way better than Scholes. I have 50 Premier League players that, in my opinion, were better than Paul Scholes. And do you know what's kind of head-wrecking? It's creeping into the young society. Like, I have young people on TikTok, not even me, just any TikTok that's about the Gerrard Scholes debate or how good Scholes was. It's like these 11-year-olds going on about, oh, you don't understand how good Paul Scholes was. You don't understand. Like, you are 11, mate. Like, the only reason you've that is because you've like a dad or an uncle sitting on a couch drinking Fosters and they're like, oh yeah, Scholes was way better than Gerrard. Like, just tell him put the can down and fucking tell him some proper sense. Tell me something for real, like. Dad, teach me something, like, because what you're telling me isn't right, like. I have 50, I'm going to repeat this for the whole thing, 50 Premier League players. Now, before I start, he was a good player. Was he world class? No, he was not world class. He was surrounded by great players in one of the best teams the world has ever seen. He was not a passenger, but he was a good number 11 or 12 that was on the team that could go in and do a shift. He could dictate the pace of the game, but he had a lot of shortcomings. He couldn't head the ball, he couldn't tackle. Do you know what I mean? His mobility wasn't great, let's be honest. I don't remember Paul Scholes tracking back, winning a tackle, driving up the pitch. I don't remember this. I remember him as a bit of a Thiago, like. Do you know? He can make it happen, like. But other than that, he was tidy, like. He was tidy. Right, okay, here's players than Paul Scholes was better than, in my opinion, before I even start. Here are some players that Paul Scholes was better than. Bruno Fernandes. In my opinion, Paul Scholes is better than Bruno Fernandes. If you ask me to pick a midfield in the morning, or ask someone to be in the dressing room, I would say Paul Scholes. I don't think he's crap, do you know? He's better than James Milner. He's better than Paul Pogba, Jack Wilshere, Aaron Ramsey, Jorginho. I would have Paul Scholes over Jorginho. Do you know? I would have Paul Scholes over Mesut Ozil. And I would have Paul Scholes over the likes of John Obi Mikel, fellas that have played in centre mid position for years and won everything. I would have Paul Scholes over them people. I don't think he's garbage. But to talk about him in the sense that he is up there with the absolute greats like Patrick Vieira, Roy Keane, Steven Gerrard, Kevin De Bruyne, are you off your game, mate? Are you off your game? There's fellas here that would munch him. He couldn't get into the England team. People are like, oh, he had to go outright because they were trying to accommodate. No, he was outright because he wasn't good enough to be in the centre. He wasn't good. He wasn't as good as Steven Gerrard, Frank Lampard. What they should have done is just play Gareth Barry or Michael Carrick in the defensive midfield and then just played Steven Gerrard and Lampard in front of him. Problem solved. The whole thing that messed up the Gerrard-Lampard era was Paul Scholes. Because this notion that he's world-class and can dictate play. He's no Pirlo, boy. He's no Pirlo, like. Pirlo's the guy that you actually think Paul Scholes is. Paul Scholes isn't that, like. Do you know? He's a good player, guys. He's a good player, a fan favourite, a local boy. Well, like, came up through the academy, came up not too far away from Manchester. I think it was Oldham or something. I don't know where the dude's from, okay? He's just notions, guys. It's absolute notions. And trust me, I could have made a list, and I probably will make a list soon, of 50 centre-backs that were better than Jamie Carragher. I think Liverpool fans, and I am a Liverpool fan, are deluded sometimes when it comes to Jamie Carragher as well. A terrible centre-back. A passenger. He's the reason we didn't go on and win a Premier League and more Champions Leagues and more cups at that time. Because we had Gerrard, Fernando Torres, Luis Suarez, like all these players. It was the Carraghers that were holding us back. And we signed a centre-back every year trying to make up for him. The only thing, thank God for Carragher's sake, is that every centre-back we got was absolute Cat Milosian, like. Do you know what I mean? Like, we were signing Ridderbuck Song. We were signing Sacco, Lovren. Lovren was after him, but you know what I mean? Like, we signed Traore. We signed Traore as a centre-back. We moved him to left-back because the man was cat. He was coming in to replace Carragher, like. He wouldn't replace me for Bohor Celtic, like. Do you know what I mean? And I don't play centre-back, and I'm already replaced, so it don't really matter, guys. So, yeah, look, I don't think he's a terrible player, but I think he is the most overrated player in history. Whoever talks about him in that caliber is nonsense. I enjoy his career. He got a lot of goals. He played in a lot of good games. Came back from retirement, out of retirement to play an extra couple of seasons. I admire that. Jeez, I don't knock him, like, but he's not up there with all these players. So here's a list of 50 players that are better than Paul Scholes. And before I start, the first 10 are non-negotiable. Like, if you disagree with the first 10 players that I mention in this, just you won't like me, I suppose. We won't get on. Do you know? The middle 30, I think you can give or take. You can give or take. You're like, oh, I disagree with that, Mike. I agree with that, Mike. The middle 30 are fair enough. And the last 10 then, from 40 to 50, are, you know, clicks. They're clicks. They're for reels. They'll be turned into reels, so a load of kids will disagree with me, boosting my content. Hence, my algorithm, it will show up in everybody's newsfeed and other big words and such like that. Alright, guys. So, like I said, he's better than a few good players, like Milner, like Bruno Fernandes, Pogba, Wilshere, Ramsey, all those guys. The 50 players that have played in the Premier League that are better than Paul Scholes. And one more rule before I start. They only had to play in the Premier League. It doesn't mean they were good in the Premier League. Do you know? Like, it could be a guy that was unbelievable somewhere else, came in, played 6 months in the Premier League when he was 37 and left. That's what counts. There's 50, guys. I'm naming 50. That's what we're on about here. All right, okay. First 10, non-negotiable. I'm not even going to go on about it. I'm not even going to go, he's this, he's that. I'm not even going to go on about it. All right, first 10 that are better than Paul Scholes. Roy Keane. Okay, simple as. Kevin De Bruyne, simple as. Steven Gerrard, Frank Lampard, Patrick Vieira, Yaya Toure, David Silva, N'Golo Kante, Paul Gascoigne, Brian Robson. Okay, so those top 10. Okay, and I suppose I'm 31. I can deal with today's young fellas and who they think is cool and who they can vibe with, and also the older generation and their stories of older players. And I go back and YouTube them, or do you know what I mean, watch an old game and all that, and completely get it. So I think I've a good grasp of both sides of the fence here that I am sitting on. So the first 10, non-negotiable. I'm not even going to go on about it. The first 10 are non-negotiable, okay? And now I've kind of done it in clubs. So here's players that kind of Man United that I think in the Premier League era that overall are better than Paul Scholes. Now, centre mid, they have to be centre mid, okay? Now, there's a couple of defensive midfielders, there's a couple of attacking midfielders, okay? But I mean the centre mid position, they can do both a CM, a CDM, and a centre attacker midfielder. No, I haven't taken the piss. I haven't gone Coutinho, Dimitri Payet, like not out and out number 10s. I've gone guys that can do kind of both, you know, and defensive midfielders as well. I honestly think that Michael Carrick was better than Paul Scholes. I've often said this. Michael Carrick, I always made the mistake that Michael Carrick was shit. He's not. I remember being in school and United were winning everything, and he was kind of the only player I could think of to pick on, because the likes of Rooney, Tevez, Ronaldo, they're all unbelievable players. Berbatov, Vidic, Rio Ferdinand, Evra, they're all unbelievable players. So I would be like, oh yeah, Carrick, he's no good. Carrick was the most consistent of the lot of them. He's unbelievable. So Michael Carrick, for me, is better than Paul Scholes. Casemiro, the man's won 5 Champions League titles, starts centre midfield for Brazil. Non-negotiable in my opinion. Christian Eriksen. Overall, Christian Eriksen is a way classier player than Paul Scholes. I think they do the exact same thing. I honestly think Christian Eriksen, internationally, for all the clubs he's been at, the way he can turn it on, the man came back from the debt. He now plays for Manchester United in the Paul Scholes position. I think overall, Christian Eriksen is a far better player than Paul Scholes, in my opinion. Bastian Schweinsteiger, here's where I'm kind of taking the piss, okay? I know Bastian Schweinsteiger was a massive flop for Manchester United, but overall, he's a World Cup winner, an absolute mainstay in the Bayern Munich team for best part of 2 decades. He played right mid earlier in his career, moved to centre mid, and he was an absolute top class player. Not 2 decades, what am I on about? A decade. Bastian Schweinsteiger, which for the Germans out there, correct me if I'm wrong, does Schweinsteiger mean pig minder? I think it does. So yeah, Bastian Schweinsteiger played in the Premier League, a better player than Paul Scholes. One Sebastian Veron. Veron was not good in the Premier League again. He was actually signed to replace Paul Scholes. That's the other thing. Alex Ferguson has always tried to find replacements for Paul Scholes. So that'll even think, and he didn't even always start him. So I don't even know, the fans, they're blowing smoke up your holes, lads. Veron, Argentinian international, absolute outstanding player. I remember my first big World Cup was the 98 World Cup that I can remember because I was born in 92. And this guy, I remember my dad even telling me about him, you know what I mean? Watch out for this guy. I think he was playing for Parma in Serie A at the time. And they had Batistuta, also Argentinian. No, he was Fiorentina. But anyway, what am I talking about? Yeah. Overall, Sebastian Veron was a way better player than Paul Scholes. Have him in my team in the morning. Didn't do well for Chelsea and didn't do well for Man United. Just in the Premier League in general. Paul Ince, going to divide a few people, but what I will say is that he captained both clubs. Not a lot of people can captain Liverpool and captain Manchester United. Well, actually, the first game I ever went to, Liverpool game, was in 98, and Paul Scholes was our captain. Or not Paul Scholes. Paul Ince was our captain, sorry. And he had played for Inter Milan, he had played for Man United, West Ham, and had captained all of them, which is actually just, will tell you all about him. I know a completely different player, but I know Paul Scholes from my younger days. Loved the dude. Now, I know Scholes is a better looking footballer. He'll do tidier things than Paul Scholes. But Paul Ince was a better player, in my opinion, overall. So then we'll move on to the Man City players. I've mentioned Keane, De Bruyne, Gerrard, Lampard, Vieira, Yaya Toure, David Silva, N'Golo Kante, Paul Gascoigne, and Brian Robson in my first 10. So I'll obviously just move on to the players now. So we're actually on number 17 at the moment that are better than Paul Scholes. So we'll move on to the Manchester City players. So Gundogan. I think Paul Scholes and Gundogan are very similar players. I just think Gundogan has a bit more steel about him. And when the moment matters, he's he turns it on when it counts. The amount of goals he's gotten recently for Man City in the title race has been absolutely ridiculous. So yeah, Gundogan, better than Paul Scholes in my opinion. Bernardo Silva, one of the hardest men ever to get the ball off. Technically a midfielder, technically a centre midfielder. So yeah, Rodri, I think this man is just getting better and better, and I think in the next 5 years we'll be talking about him as one of the all-time great centre midfielders that has ever played the game. Honestly, the man annoys me how good he is. And the guy he replaced as well, who got too old, masterclass defensive midfielder, Fernandinho. So we'll move on to the Arsenal players that were better than Paul Scholes in the Premier League era. Cesc Fabregas, far better than Paul Scholes, does everything Paul Scholes does and just better. Emmanuel Petit, for the young Thundercats out there, you don't understand this. Emmanuel Petit scored the winning goal in the World Cup final in 98. The winning goal is in the third goal in a 3-0 victory over Brazil in that famous final that gave France their first ever World Cup. He played for Arsenal, went on to play for Barca. Now, he had a ponytail, French guy, do you know what I mean? Slick looking Rick. You think looking at him that he might be a bit soft. Nah, man was hard as nails, boy. Hard as nails. I swear to God. He'd scare you, He'd scare you. Won a World Cup, won everything with Arsenal. Went on Barcelona then to finish his career. Amazing player, Emmanuel Petit. Odegaard. Now, I know it might be too close to call or whatever, but I think we can all agree from what we've seen this season, Odegaard has been fantastic. Fantastic, and he'll only get better. And in the morning, if I had to pick a team, Scholes or Odegaard, right now, Odegaard. And the man's only 22, 23. So what else is he going to do? A little bit of a cheat code. Lassana Diarra played for Chelsea, Portsmouth, and a small bit for Arsenal. He's creeping in my Arsenal list here. Not so much for what he did in the Premier League. Brilliant for Portsmouth, by the way. But he went on and played for Real Madrid afterwards. Probably in a tough time for Real Madrid, to be honest. They were going through a bit of a lull. But yeah. Class player, Lassana Diarra, absolutely class. Gilberto Silva, part of the Invincibles. When he left, a big part of Arsenal left. They haven't sorted it out even today. I suppose they have with the likes of Jorginho and Partey and there's a couple of defensive midfielders inside there. But yeah, Gilberto Silva was a boss centre midfielder. Santi Cazorla, love the man. I'll have nothing bad said about Santi Cazorla. He gets in here on my list. So now I'll move on to Chelsea players that were better than Paul Scholes, and I've already mentioned Frank Lampard. I'm going to go for Michael Ballack. Michael Ballack played in every final that there was. I think he played in a Champions League final, a World Cup final, an FA Cup final, and lost the league by a point in the same season. Michael Ballack, absolutely unbelievable player. Hard as nails. Makelele, the man was so good that he had a position named after him. Michael Essien, An absolute boss, played for Chelsea, Real Madrid, AC Milan. I don't think Paul Scholes could do that. Ramirez ruined his career by going to China. But this Brazilian Ramirez for Chelsea, probably one of the main reasons they won their first Champions League title. That goal he scored at the Nou Camp was absolutely unbelievable. A box-to-box centre midfielder. Again, if you ask me in the morning, will I prefer prime Paul Scholes or prime Ramirez? Give me prime Ramirez all day, because I know he's going to give me 15 kilometres on the clock and a goal threat. I know Paul Scholes is a goal threat, but he can't tackle. Ramirez can tackle. He doesn't mind the nasty side because he's Brazilian. And like I say all the time, everybody goes on about Samba soccer. Do you know that Brazilians are unreal? Any Brazilian I've ever played is nasty. Yeah, it's Samba soccer, but they'd murder their own mother for a throw-in, and it's something I admire. That's why Brazilians are so good. It's not the step-overs, it's the nastiness, it's the wanting, it's the drive, it's the not pulling out of the 50-50s, going up for everything. And yeah, it's not all Samba soccer. So yeah, and this man defines it. Ramirez, nasty. Goal threat, tackle, do everything for you. Like, don't forget, like, Chelsea were down to 10 men at the Nou Camp and a goal down. This man scored the goal to get him back into the game, actually to win. And then Torres scored later on. But they were down 10 men to the best team of all time. And Ramirez was taking 2 men's positions. Do I think Paul Scholes... 10 men against Paul Scholes. Paul Scholes can't run around the place. You don't win that final. If Paul Scholes is in that position in that final, Chelsea don't win that final. Do you know what I mean? Mad facts, Mikey. Mad facts. Oh, make money. Take money. Alright, okay, let's move on. Nemanja Matic. Again, not great at Man United, but absolutely fantastic with Chelsea. Again, won everything, and he's still playing today with Roma, I believe. Yeah, but if you ask me in the morning, who do I want? Matic in his prime all day. Ruud Gullit played for Chelsea, centre mid, one of the greatest players to ever play the game. If you're telling me Paul Scholes is better than Ruud Gullit, now technically he played in the Premier League. I know he was in the twilight, but he played in the Premier League. Ruud Gullit, unbelievable player. So we'll move on to Liverpool, and this is going to get very controversial as I go down the list. I've already named Steven Gerrard. So number 33 on my list of the 50 better players in the Premier League era than Paul Scholes. I'm going to have to come up with a better title than that. It's way too long. If you're with me this far, we've done well to get to 33. So I've gone with Xavi Alonso. I don't think you can disagree with that one. Even if you hate Liverpool, I just think he won a Champions League final with Liverpool in the worst team of all time. Just himself and Stevie G, that was it. Do you know? Everyone says Carragher, but like I said in the Carragher, like that was a great performance in the final. But in the first half, just watch the first half. The man got skinned alive every time. Like, we're 3 goals down, mate. He's a defender. Anyway, so Xavi Alonso. I don't need to speak anymore. Real Madrid, Bayern Munich, one of the coolest, slickest ricks I've ever seen. And he plays the same game as Paul Scholes. They're passing pretty football. And I'd have Alonso all day. World Cup finalist. Won the World Cup, won the Euros, won everything. Internationally and nationally and in England and in Germany. Okay, so this is where it gets a bit hairy, folks. I'm going to say Fabinho. I know Fabinho's shit this season, overall as a player. If you just take this season out of it, Fabinho's class. I know they're different players, but Fabinho makes my list. Mascherano. Mascherano is a Liverpool player that is a better centre mid than Paul Scholes. More about him, more aggression. Again, I know different players, but he went on to play for Barcelona as a centre back. The man is the same height as Paul Scholes. Could Paul Scholes play centre back? But then I know what you're saying. Could Mascherano pass the ball around or score goals like Paul Scholes? Probably not. But Mascherano is a better player, all in all, in my opinion. Gini Wijnaldum. Gini Wijnaldum is one of the most consistent players in the Premier League era for Newcastle, Liverpool. It all went to shit for PSG and Roma so far for him. But Gini Wijnaldum, for every game Gini Wijnaldum missed, he played 31 games. Do you get me? So he's longevity. So for every game he played for Liverpool, for every game he missed for Liverpool, he played 31. To put that in the same context, for every game that Thiago has missed for Liverpool, he has played 1.6. So for every game he missed, you get him to play 1.6. For Wijnaldum, it's 33. That is fucking ridiculous. Wijnaldum holds a close place to my heart. Of course, the Barcelona game. Like, people underestimate. They're like, oh, Wijnaldum, yeah, he won great. The man was unbelievable. And when we go on about goals when you need it, that man has scored some legendary goals for Liverpool. And, yeah, I love him. I honestly think that he's better than Paul Scholes. And honestly, the next one as well, Thiago. Thiago, again, same type of player as Paul Scholes. Overall, played for Barca, played for Bayern Munich, played for Liverpool, won every trophy there is to win. And Thiago is a better player. So now we move on from like the other players in the league that were better and played for different clubs. Let's say the lesser clubs in the Premier League than Liverpool, United, Chelsea, all them. So in the next one, number 38 on my list is Luka Modric. He should probably be put in the no-nonsense, non-negotiable category because the man was ridiculous at football and still is. Declan Rice is next. I would prefer Declan Rice in my team than Paul Scholes. Even what he's done internationally so far with England is ridiculous, It's been absolutely ridiculous. Here's the last 10, and like I said, the last 10 are hairy enough. This is for clicks and views, but you know what? I honestly believe in all of them, okay? So, number 40, Ivan Cambiasso, played 1 year for Leicester City in the twilight of his career and was class. He kept them up when Nigel Pearson was the manager, and it was the year before they won the league, and they did one of the greatest escapes of all time, and largely it was down to Ivan Cambiasso, Mahrez and Vardy. Their goals in his defence was absolutely unbelievable. But Cambiasso, Argentinian player, played in Serie A probably his whole career, unbelievable player, bald-headed guy. I think he was class. Mikel Arteta, now not only for Arsenal later in his career, but at Everton, when Everton were in their prime, himself, Fellaini, Tim Cahill, you had Lukaku, you had Jelavic up front, you had Heitinga centre-back, left-back was Leighton Baines, you had Jagielka, Sylvain Distin, Seamus Coleman, Stephen Pienaar. This was a quality team. Mikel Arteta was the heartbeat of that team. Very tidy player, very classy. Couldn't do it internationally because Xavi, Iniesta, Busquets, Alonso, tons more. Marcus Senna, you won't remember him, but he was absolutely unbelievable. A couple of classy players. But Mikel Arteta was a better player, all in all, in my opinion. It's going to upset some people, but he was, in my opinion. Alexis McAllister, the man won the World Cup this year, had one of the seasons of his life for Brighton. I think he's going to get better. He's linked with both Manchester United and Liverpool. It wasn't just Messi in the World Cup, guys. And when you talk about centre mids, you're probably like, oh, he's not a centre mid. He was centre mid for Argentina in the World Cup. He was one of the most impressive players in the World Cup. Bar Messi, player of the tournament, in my opinion. Ruben Neves, better centre midfielder than Paul Scholes, in my opinion. You're probably turned off this podcast as you speak, but Ruben Neves, here we go. Here's where it gets hairy. As a centre mid, JJ Okocha. Not for what he did for Bolton Wanderers, even though he was class, but what for he did in the 90s and internationally for Nigeria. Absolutely class. Gary Speed, a couple for the old timers out there, but Gary Speed was a class player for Newcastle, Leeds. I think he's the second most games ever played in the Premier League. So longevity, absolutely class. God rest his soul. Bruno Guimaraes, not only for what he did this season and last season for Newcastle, but for what he can achieve. I believe anything that Newcastle will go on and achieve in the next 5 years, I know for a fact he'll be playing. He'll be playing centre mid. He'll be starting for Brazil soon as well. When Casemiro and Fabinho and all these boys get old, I think he's a hardy man, boy. I love him. He's better than Fred and all those boys as well that even come on as a sub for Brazil, in my opinion. Number 47, Gareth Barry. The most games ever played by any player in the Premier League is Gareth Barry for Aston Villa, Man City, West Brom. Am I missing a team? Who else did he play for? Did he play for someone else? Anyway, did he play for Coventry? Anyway, about 600 games, 800 games, I don't know, but Gareth Barry's going in there. This is where it gets hairy, folks. You're already disagreeing with me. I can feel it. Yohan Kabay. Wow, Mike, did you just say that? I did just say that. Number 48 on my list is Yohan Kabay. For about 2 years there in his prime, was unbelievable. I was actually at a game at St. James's Park with Psychic Dan, and he was unbelievable, scored a free kick, was starting for France at the time, went on to play for PSG, came back and played for Crystal Palace, was unbelievable for Palace for 1 year, and then I'm under the conspiracy. He signed for New Balance, right? And I played in these boots at the time, and Fellaini, Yohan Kabay, they all played in these boots, and they sued New Balance because they were so bad, and all of their careers dropped off at the same time, as well as myself, that wore those boots. So number 49 on my list is Juninho. Juninho from Middlesbrough. Again, for the old timers out there like myself, quality player. What was he doing at Middlesbrough? What was he He won the World Cup in 98. Was he also in the 2002 World Cup squad? I believe he was. So does he have 2 World Cups? Played for the young guys. He was like Coutinho, but had a bit more muscle, I suppose, and he could dribble with it a bit more. I don't know, he was class. I don't know what he was doing with Middlesbrough, but Middlesbrough had decent players at the time. They had like fellas like Ravanelli, and wasn't Brian Robson playing from in the same team? Yeah, they had a good team. I think they got into Europe. But yeah, Janino, what was he doing? What was he doing at the club? One of those players that was far too good for his club. Another thing that I should be doing a podcast on. Number 50 on my list, and here it goes. Here's it all for clicks and views. The 50th player that was better than Paul Scholes in the Premier League era, Jordan Henderson. My captain, your captain, Jordan Henderson. Completely different players, but in the morning, if you ask me, who do you want in the team? Jordan Henderson. I'm covering my smile, folks. I'm covering my smile. I don't know, can I even keep a straight face saying it? Yeah, do you know what? Number 50. Alright, there's 49 players better than Paul Scholes. Alright? The 49 players better than Paul Scholes. I'm winding up the United fans a bit much, do you know? But I think I've made my point. I won't go on about it anymore, but I think I've made my point. Anybody that ever says it to you, just send this podcast to them, right? Just go, oh, Paul Scholes is way better than Gerrard. Here's a list of 49 players. You can have Henderson. Paul Scholes was better than Henderson, okay? You can have that, okay? And here's a list of 49 players that were better than Paul Scholes. Just show them this podcast. Tag them in this podcast, because this is sense, guys. I'm watching football all my life, and I get it, I'm a Liverpool fan. But even if I'm half wrong, there's 24.5 players better than Paul Scholes in the Premier League. Do you know, even if I'm half wrong, do you know? So cop on. Get a hold of yourself, put down the can of Fosters, and do you know what I mean? Look and go for a walk. Do you know what I mean? Because if you're one of these fellas that is going on about Paul Scholes being better than any one of the top 30 that I said, you're off your game, kid. You're off your game. Go away from around me. You're chatting shit. That's what I'll say to him. So guys, if you made it to this far in the podcast, you're a big fan. Thanks so much. Like and subscribe to the podcast. Give it a 5-star review on Spotify and all that jazz. And tell a friend about it. Yeah, hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you next time on another random podcast from the Cranky Pundit at a random time that is not consistent at all. I should be getting more consistent. Thanks very much, folks. Peace and love, y'all. Peace and love.